Hi everyone, it's Ren here, and today I would like to talk to you about philosophy again. At this point, you're probably not surprised. I'd like to talk to you about this whole idea of coming up with one's own original work, because there might be some among you who are not academics by profession. You might not have a PhD, or you might have a totally different kind of job, but you're like a thinking person. But not only are you a thinking person, you maybe are a thinking person who has thoughts that like you think deserve to be put like on paper, potentially published in the future. And you might be feeling like as long as you don't do it, as long as you like just focus on reading and having discussions about works that you love and with friends, like that's bringing something to your life. And obviously, no doubt there are lots of other activities in your life that you like, but maybe you feel like you're still missing out a little bit, like that it's like a sort of hidden or clear dream of yours to come up with that like original work. And here I'm not talking about creative writings. I want to really focus on original theoretical work. I'm going to focus on philosophy in this video, but you could you could argue that that would apply to a lot of different more like sort of theoretical disciplines, which are usually organized more systematically than a work of literature. So I would say that, if you have that feeling, you should consider starting to do it. I know it sounds like it's not super helpful to say that, but you might have seen that like in the videos I make on my channel, many of them are dedicated to what is called open monism. I've actually done an interview about it yesterday with a YouTuber who was very kind to offer to interview me, and it was pretty fun. So I've come to like a fair level of development of an original philosophical framework. At least I think it is to some degree original. And maybe having heard like sort of my experience, you'll realize that if you're so inclined, it's actually not that difficult, and you might come up with things that will really make you feel really good. And particularly, they will like not only give you the sense that like your life has meaning, but it's a meaning that doesn't disappear. You know the way like sometimes, oh yeah, you're thinking that my life has meaning, but you constantly have to recreate it in this kind of Camusian sense. What's cool about writing your own stuff is that like you can usually still visualize it, you can share it with people, so it has a certain level of concreteness. The meaning is embodied in an actual body, a body of work indeed. So I think that's amazing, and I think that a lot of people have the capability, it's a fundamental belief of mine that a lot of people have the capability of doing that, and I do not do that because either they're intimidated or they are like they think they're not good enough, or they think it's going to be too hard. So what I would suggest really is to start, obviously, if you do lots of reading, if you're a smart person and you have some creative potential, and here I mean in terms of like having original ideas, if you are that kind of person and you like reading books, say you like reading lots of books on Nietzsche or Schopenhauer or on Hegel or on Plato, Heraclitus, Thomas Aquinas, whoever that is, in the philosophical field, for instance. Well, if you're like a smart person and you have potential, after a while you'll start developing those insights. And what I recommend is starting to jot them down. Instead of just having the insight and thinking, oh, maybe that's interesting. But perhaps like it's been thought about a million times before. And that will like sometimes dissuade you from like jotting it down. So what I really recommend is that you do not resist that temptation, and you actually always kind of keep a notepad with you, and whenever you get an insight, to write it down. and to write it down every time that you have an idea based on like some of your readings or discussions that you have with people online, people in reality, discussions with yourself. It can really be anything, but I think what's important here is to have a certain kind of megalomania, or at least what might be perceived as megalomania, and that megalomania would simply consist in like, thinking that some of your insights are worth writing down in your own private notepad, and that's like, it's not that megalomaniac if you think about it. You just keep it, and in case it's like, in and of itself, having an insight that you think is kind of cool and writing it down, it provides a certain kind of pleasure, and I'm sure many of you do that. But you start doing that, and you don't really think of anything else. You don't like try to force yourself to like start a Word document, it's blank, and be like, okay, like I want to create a system, or I want to create an original philosophical work. This is how I'm going to do it. I think in this case, like, it might backfire quite seriously. But if you just like, you don't really take it that seriously, you just literally have, you do some readings and like you jot down ideas. I think that if you do that a lot, not because you're overworking yourself, but because you read a lot of philosophy and it just becomes a habit after a while, after a few weeks, eventually you'll realize that like the insight that you jot down connects with one another. Like you might realize that after a few months, sometimes after a few weeks, and like for the phenomenon of linking between the different insights that you will come up with will tend to further aggregate over time into something more complex, of course partly diffuse, because you have not yet tried to systematize anything. You're just like jotting things down and becoming more and more aware that like there is a certain pattern to what's going on, and that there's a pattern to what's going on, and like eventually you're like, okay, what should I do with this? And this is where it becomes really, really interesting, because there's a phase, it can happen, like there's no rule for it, where you see that there's a pattern and you realize that maybe you can start jotting down not only these insights that you get from your readings, they will continue happening if you continue to read, of course, but you can also start writing about the links between the different insights, building up the pattern, giving a voice to this kind of web that's starting to develop, and you start writing on it, and you'll see that eventually you'll start having terms for what's going on in your in your little proto system, in your or proto view or work, and things start to link with one another, and then you compare it with like the stuff you've read, and you're like, yeah, it's not quite the approach that was embraced by that author. There was a reason why I wasn't in complete agreement. And my friend who has that opinion, well, I mean, he has that opinion. It's a worthy opinion. It's not my opinion, and so far I haven't found anything quite like my approach. That level of sort of uniqueness requires that you already develop your insights a bit further, but it tends to happen organically if you just keep at it. And from that moment, what I recommend is like starting to, like, maybe you start a new notepad and you discuss the insights that you've come up with, like the ideas, and you try to approach them from a philosophical point of view. So you could write down like, so this idea, like, how does it hold up against a potential objection that's like this or that? Or you can even imagine like being in your opponent's shoes or trying to disprove what you came up with. You try to enrich it, and eventually you'll see that like your insights yield further insights that connect with one another even further, and you'll be able to like put them under some kind of umbrella term and link it with other things. And progressively, if you continue keeping at it, you'll come up with like some kind of original thought pattern, and it's like, it doesn't really even have to be based on like original research, say like in a doctoral sense. And that's kind of why I thought making this video might be interesting, because I'm not necessarily trying to address like people who are doing a PhD in philosophy. Of course, if this video interests them, that's so much the better. I mean, I have a lot of respect for people who do PhDs in philosophy, but like here the approach is not necessarily a specialist. You think that you have interesting ideas, sometimes you get flashes. Here's a way to like actually come up with something original that you could show to your friends, people who are interested, have discussions, and feel kind of proud. Not like because you can boast that you've come up with an original work or original thought system, but more like that you have given life to what to that creative potential inside you that you always thought existed, and so you will have no regrets. You have come up with your original thought, and it will be original to the extent that it is. You know, like no one can pretend to be the most original writer on the block, but being original, I think, depends on mainly two things: doing a lot of reading so that you're aware of what's going on. But if reading philosophy is your passion, you will probably be more or less aware. And I think the second condition is practicing one's critical thinking. And what I mean by that is critical thinking on your own work. So instead of like just reading a lot of philosophy and accumulating knowledge, what's very important is when you have your insights, to start testing them, just to let yourself be guided by them, to imagine criticizing them, defending them against potential objections, sharing them. And then like you will get to refine the insights. And in the process of refining the insights, you will also sharpen your philosophical acuity. Your philosophical reasoning will become much, much sharper by virtue of writing your thoughts, testing them, showing them to people. It will be like that does more to the sharpening of your philosophical self than the reading. What the reading does is it sharpens, it broadens your philosophical knowledge. It's almost like more of a historical kind of database. And a lot of people fall into that. I don't want to call it a trap, because for some people that's what they prefer. But if you think that you can actually contribute something creative, something of your own, you need to start writing. Even if you think it's a bit megalomaniac, here's my thoughts, you jot it down, you jot down a few, you connect them with one another, you try to see the patterns, the connections, you test them, and you continue. I guarantee you, after like 6 months, a year, you'll start having something, and it's your own. It's your own, and even if it is like 20% your own and 80% influenced, that's already huge. And I think it's worth it. So sunset is now approaching, so I think it's time for me to leave you guys, but I thought that was useful, kind of based on my experience, probably not super organized, but I kind of did it off the cuff. So see you guys, and let me know in the comments if that was useful. Ciao!